When most people hear the word Afghanistan, they think of war, headlines, mountains, militants, endless conflict, a country trapped inside the evening news. But that image hides something far older and far more astonishing. Because Afghanistan is not just a battlefield. It is one of the oldest crossroads of civilization on Earth, a place where minds have been worked for 7,000 years, using methods so ancient they would have looked familiar to the builders of the pyramids. A place where one city may be buried beneath another, and beneath that, yet another layer reaching back toward the age of the first great kingdoms. A place where a lonely minaret seems to contain mathematical knowledge the West would only recognize centuries later. And perhaps the strangest part of all is this: we have barely begun to study it. Decades of war, instability, and isolation have turned Afghanistan into something rare in the modern world. Not an open book, but a sealed archive. A country so difficult to excavate, map, and protect that vast parts of its historical body remain almost untouched by modern science. Some estimates suggest that less than 5% of its archaeological and historical wealth has been properly explored. 5%. That means what we think we know may be almost nothing. Tonight, we are going through 8 of the most extraordinary mysteries of Afghanistan, from hidden lakes and vanished Buddhist worlds to coin-strewn mountain passes, mathematical towers, sacred cities, ancient Lapis mines, and valleys where silver seems to grow back from the earth itself. Because Afghanistan is not a country without history. It may be a country with too much history for the modern world to fully grasp. In the highlands of central Afghanistan lies one of the most surreal landscapes in Asia, Band-e Amir, a chain of deep blue lakes separated by natural travertine dams, each basin holding a slightly different shade, a slightly different mood, a slightly different mystery. At first glance, the place looks almost too beautiful to be real. Water of impossible color, pale mineral edges, cliffs and open sky, the kind of landscape that feels more painted than geological. But Band-e Amir is not just beautiful, it is strange. Because even though the lakes are known and mapped, parts of their inner behavior remain elusive. Some sections have produced inconsistent depth readings. In some places, measurements do not align cleanly. And during droughts, the lakes do not always recede in the same way or at the same rate. That matters. Because if separate basins lose water unevenly, it suggests that what we see at the surface may not be the whole system. There may be underground pathways, hidden feeds, mineral channels, or subterranean hydrogeological behavior that we still do not fully understand. And that is what makes Band-e Amir such a strong opening mystery. It looks like a postcard, but it behaves like a riddle. Why do these lakes seem connected and disconnected at the same time? What unseen geology beneath them controls their rhythm? Why does the water seem to obey a logic the eye cannot see? In countries with dense scientific access, mysteries like this would be studied aggressively, measured repeatedly, and turned into large public research programs. But Afghanistan has not had that luxury. And so, Band-e Amir remains suspended between geology and myth, a natural wonder whose most important mechanisms may still be flowing somewhere below the visible world. And if the lakes teach us that Afghanistan hides systems under the surface, the next location takes that idea even further. Because in Bamiyan, the mystery is not under the water, it is inside the mountain. Most people know Bamiyan for one reason: the giant Buddhas that once stood carved into the cliffs. And because the world watched in horror as those statues were destroyed, Bamiyan became fixed in public memory as a story of loss. But the statues were only the surface, because behind and around them, the mountain itself is full of caves, cells, chambers, painted spaces, monastic worlds cut into stone, an entire hidden architecture of devotion. And inside that world, archaeologists found something astonishing: evidence of oil-based painting techniques centuries before oil painting is supposed to have appeared in Europe. That single fact is enough to change the scale of the site completely. Because now, Bamiyan is no longer just a Buddhist monument destroyed in the modern era. It becomes a challenge to simple art history. It suggests that techniques associated in popular imagination with much later European traditions may have much deeper and more geographically dispersed roots. And that is only one part of the mystery. The other part is harder to verify, but impossible to ignore. The persistent idea that somewhere in these cave systems, hidden chambers, sealed recesses, or forgotten spaces may once have contained, or may still conceal, manuscripts, teachings, and monastic archives hidden during waves of invasion, perhaps even during the destruction brought by forces connected to Genghis Khan. A lost library in the mountain. Whether the reality matches the legend or not, the story works because the physical setting makes it feel possible. These are not open halls on a plain. These are chambers within a cliff face, a vertical monastic maze where objects, texts, icons, and knowledge could vanish into stone. And that is what Bamiyan represents at its deepest level. Not only destruction, concealment. A place where history may not simply have been erased, but hidden. And once you accept that caves in Afghanistan may still contain things the world has not seen, the next mystery becomes even more vivid. Because now we move to a mountain pass where history does not stay buried. It melts out of the snow. There are very few images in historical storytelling more powerful than this one. A shepherd walking through a mountain pass in spring, and under his feet, as the snow melts, coins begin to appear. Different rulers, different centuries, different empires, Greek, Hellenistic, perhaps linked to the era of Alexander the Great. Later Islamic layers, fragments of movement, trade, army crossings, and forgotten journeys scattered into the pass and then preserved by the mountain itself. This is the mystery of Kawwak Pass, not a museum, not a curated excavation, but a route where history behaves like seasonal runoff. Every spring, the mountain gives back pieces of the past, and what makes that image so extraordinary is what it implies. This was not a marginal path. It was a living artery. Armies crossed here, traders crossed here, caravans crossed here, worlds crossed here, and every dropped coin, every small metallic loss became part of an archive written not on paper, but in snow, gravel, and thaw. This is Afghanistan at its most cinematic. History not locked behind glass, but literally surfacing under open sky. And the pass carries another layer of intrigue through the people of the surrounding highlands. Groups like the Nuristanis, long associated with narratives of isolation, cultural distinctiveness, and historical survival in landscapes that resisted easy control. That matters because Kawwak is not just about old objects. It is about continuity in difficult terrain. The same mountains that preserved roots also preserved separations. They allowed traffic and isolation at once. They connected civilizations while protecting enclaves of difference. That is a pattern repeated across Afghanistan again and again. A corridor and a fortress at the same time. And if one mountain pass can hold centuries in its snow, the next mystery is even more radical. Because in Bagram, the problem is not movement through time. It is time stacked on top of itself. In Bagram, the Earth seems to behave like an archive of civilizations, layered one on top of another. At one level lies the memory of a city associated with the world of Alexander the Great and the Hellenistic age that followed his campaigns into Central Asia. But beneath that layer, there are suggestions of something even older. Much older. Older urban traces. Older foundations. Older occupation horizons reaching back far beyond the Greek world, perhaps toward eras separated from Alexander by 2,000 years or more. That is what makes Bagram such a powerful archaeological paradox. It is not just one ancient city. It may be a city built over another city, built over another historical landscape still deeper below. A vertical sequence of human ambition. And that should completely change how people imagine Afghanistan, because the country is often treated in popular discourse as if history merely passed through it, as if armies came and went and little else remained. But Bagram suggests the opposite. It suggests permanence, reoccupation, rebuilding, civilizational sediment. This was not empty transit space. It was inhabited, structured, and reused across immense spans of time. That kind of layering is archaeologically explosive because every deeper level has the potential to rewrite assumptions about chronology, exchange, urbanization, and cultural transmission in the region. And once again, the tragedy is that sustained research has been so limited. In another geopolitical reality, Bagram would be one of the most intensively studied long-duration settlement zones in Eurasia. Instead, much of its deeper story remains partial, interrupted, vulnerable, or inaccessible. So Bagram stands as one of the clearest symbols of Afghanistan's buried magnitude, a place where even a famous ancient layer may not be the beginning, only the middle. And from buried cities, we now move to a tower that seems to have hidden mathematics in plain sight for centuries. Standing isolated in a dramatic valley, the Minaret of Jam looks at first like one more masterpiece of medieval Islamic architecture. Elegant, tall, ornamental, remote. But then people began looking at its patterns more carefully. And suddenly, this was no longer just architecture. It became mathematics. The ornamental geometry of the minaret has been linked by some observers to patterning so sophisticated that it invites comparison to quasi-crystalline structures, arrangements whose logic resembles forms that modern science would only formally recognize much later. That comparison is what gives this site its narrative power, because it produces one of the strongest intellectual shocks in the entire Afghanistan story. The idea that something recognized in modern science and celebrated in the modern world as advanced insight may have been embodied in decorative brickwork centuries earlier, a structure from the 12th century that appears in visual logic to anticipate ideas that the West would only come to articulate and honor far later. Now, whether one frames this with strict caution or bold wonder, the effect is the same. The Minaret of Jam destabilizes the modern arrogance that assumes intellectual sophistication always moves in one direction, toward us. Instead, it reminds us that mathematical imagination has appeared in many civilizations, in many media, long before modern institutions learned how to name it. And that may be the deeper mystery of Jam. Not just how it was built, but how much encoded knowledge can live inside beauty without being immediately recognized as knowledge. Because once mathematics becomes ornament, and ornament becomes evidence, the tower stops being a monument. It becomes a message, and from there, the story deepens again, not into architecture this time, but into belief itself. Because the next city may have shaped some of the most powerful religious ideas on Earth. There are ancient cities that were wealthy. There are ancient cities that were strategic. And then there are places like Balkh, cities surrounded by claims so large that they seem to push beyond history and into the foundations of civilization itself. Balkh has been called the mother of cities. It has been associated in tradition with profound antiquity, immense influence, and one of the most consequential figures in religious thought, Zarathustra, or Zoroaster. If Balkh truly belongs to the spiritual geography of early Zoroastrian tradition, then the implications are enormous. Because Zoroastrianism is not just one more old religion in the chain of history. It may have shaped some of the deepest moral and eschatological concepts that later entered the major Abrahamic traditions. The struggle between good and evil, cosmic moral conflict, judgment, the ultimate weighing of souls. the idea that history bends toward a final reckoning. These are not small ideas. These are civilization-level ideas. And the suggestion that a place in Afghanistan may stand near the birthplace or formative environment of such concepts changes everything about how we map religious history. Suddenly, Afghanistan is not peripheral at all. It becomes central, not just to trade, not just to empire, but to the moral imagination of half the planet. Of course, history at this depth is always contested, layered with tradition, interpretation, textual reconstruction, and the danger of overstatement. But even with caution, Balkh remains overwhelming because it represents Afghanistan as a generator of thought, not merely a receiver of it. A source, not just a crossroads. And that is why the video's logic keeps growing stronger. Each new mystery proves that Afghanistan did not simply connect worlds. In many cases, it may have helped create the ideas that shaped them. And if Balkh gives us the spiritual scale of Afghanistan, the next mystery gives us the material one. Because now we move to a mountain whose stone changed the look of empires and paintings continents away. High in Afghanistan lie some of the oldest known lapis lazuli mines on Earth, and they may have been operating for around 7,000 years. That number is staggering enough on its own. But the true force of this mystery comes from connection. Because lapis is not just a local stone, it is a global traveler. From these mountains, bluestone moved outward into the ancient world, into trade systems, elite objects, royal decoration, and eventually into the very visual language of civilizations far from Afghanistan. Think about that. Stone cut in Afghanistan could end up in the symbolic worlds of Egyptian pharaohs. And much later, ground into pigment, it could become ultramarine, the deep, luminous blue used in some of the most revered paintings of the European Renaissance. That means the radiant blue in the robes of the Virgin Mary in works by masters like Raphael or Titian may ultimately trace back to a single mountain region in Afghanistan. That is one of the most powerful visual bridges in all of cultural history. A miner in ancient Afghanistan, a caravan, a market, a chain of exchange, a pigment workshop centuries later, a Renaissance painting in Europe. One line, one mountain, one blue. And this is exactly what the best Afghanistan stories do. They take something local and reveal that it was never local at all. The mines are not just old industrial sites. They are evidence that Afghanistan has long been wired into the bloodstream of civilization. And perhaps even more astonishing is the continuity. 7,000 years of extraction. Methods passed through generations. Labor repeated across eras so distant from one another that whole empires rose and died in between, while the mountain kept giving out bluestone. That is not just economic history. That is civilizational endurance. And now we come to the final mystery, one that sounds almost mythical, but may contain just enough geological truth to refuse dismissal. Silver that grows back. In the Panjshir Valley, local people have long repeated a remarkable idea, that the silver there does not simply run out, that it somehow returns. That, in the language of oral tradition, the silver in the mountain grows. At first hearing, it sounds like pure folklore. The kind of phrase mining cultures create to express abundance, luck, or reverence for a resource that seems unusually generous. But what makes the story interesting is that it may not be entirely detached from geology, because in some mineral systems, ongoing geological processes can indeed concentrate, expose, or reform accessible veins over time in ways that make deposits seem strangely renewable to those working them across generations. Not literally alive, not magical, but dynamic enough that folklore begins to sound less like fantasy and more like an observational metaphor. And that is where Afghanistan becomes especially powerful as a subject. Its mysteries often live in the overlap between legend and physical reality. A lake with hidden hydrology, A mountain of possible hidden manuscripts, coins that surface with the thaw, mathematics hidden in brick, religious origins wrapped in deep antiquity, blue stone that traveled across civilizations, and now silver that seems to replenish itself in mountain memory. Panjshir closes the list perfectly because it returns us to the oldest human instinct in all frontier landscapes, the sense that the earth is not passive, that it remembers, that it gives, that it hides, that it renews. And in Afghanistan, that feeling is everywhere. So look at what we have just crossed. Lakes whose hidden depths and underground systems still behave like a geological puzzle. A mountain at Bamiyan that held not only giant Buddhas, but caves, early oil painting, and perhaps still hidden texts. A pass where coins from lost empires melt out of the snow every spring. A city in Bagram that may be built above much older cities below. A minaret whose patterns seem to encode mathematics centuries ahead of their time. A sacred city, Balkh, standing near the roots of ideas that shaped world religion. Ancient Lapis mines that connected Afghanistan to Egypt, to the Renaissance, and to the very color of holiness in European art. And a silver valley where geology and folklore merge into the idea that the mountain gives back what it once released. These are not isolated curiosities. Together, they form a completely different image of Afghanistan, not a blank zone of conflict, not a peripheral land at the edge of history, but a multi-layered archive of civilization, a place where geography, religion, trade, mathematics, mining, art, and empire are stacked so densely that even a partial reading feels overwhelming. And perhaps the most astonishing fact of all is this: everything we have just discussed may be only a fragment, a tiny fraction. If it is true that less than 5% of Afghanistan's archaeological and historical wealth has been seriously studied, then what we call mystery today may eventually look like the introduction. 95% still untouched. 95% not yet excavated, not yet documented, not yet protected, not yet understood. That means the real Afghanistan may still be hidden under dust, cliff walls, ruined tells, sealed caves, forgotten valleys, and inaccessible highlands. So Afghanistan is not a country without history. It may be one of the places on Earth with more history than we have even begun to process. A country that has been reduced, simplified, and misread because war closed the book before the world had learned how to read the first page. And maybe that is the deepest mystery of all. Not what Afghanistan once was, but how much of it the modern world still hasn't seen. So if Afghanistan were finally opened to full scientific study and protection, what discovery do you think would shock the world most? A lost city? A hidden monastic library? Proof of even older trade networks? New inscriptions? A deeper religious origin point? Or something nobody has even imagined yet? Write your theory in the comments. And if you want more stories like this, places where history is buried deeper than headlines, and where the oldest secrets of civilization are still waiting under stone, dust, and silence, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Because some countries are not unread, they are only unopened.